welcome. Thank you for joining us today to learn about our housing programs here for our first lunch and learn. We're excited that you're here. We'll be starting in a few minutes. We're gonna wait for a few more folks to join us. So just thank you for wanting to learn more. We're excited to share more with you today. We have a great panelist set up for you. Thank you for joining. If you're just coming on, we're going to wait a few minutes and get started for our first lunch and learn. We have an amazing panel here with us today that's going to share more about our housing programs, the work we're doing in our community, what we're going to do when this eviction moratorium lifts. So we are excited to meet with you and share more. You are awesome and amazing for taking time to spend with us today. And just to note, if you have any questions today as we go through the panel, we'll be answering those at the end, but there's a Q&A button you can always enter your questions on throughout the webinar today. So excited to hear what you're thinking and let us know what questions you have so we can try to address those today too. We'll give it about 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining us. Those of you who are just signing on, we're grateful to have you. We are excited to introduce our panel to you here in a minute. If you have questions today, please use the Q&A button anytime throughout the webinar and we'll be sure to answer those for you. 1 more minute, we're going to jump right in because we have so much good stuff to share with you today. All righty, we're jumping in because we're so excited to share more with you about our housing programs here at Mary's Place. My name's Marty Hartman. I use she, her pronouns. I am the director of Mary's Place, and I just want to say thank you for joining us on our Lunch and Learn today. We're excited to share the services that we provide together with our community partners to help women and families move quickly into housing, or most importantly, especially during this pandemic, to help keep their homes. I want to take a minute and stop today and acknowledge the land on which we stand. It is the traditional home of the Coast Salish people, specifically the traditional home of the Duwamish, Snohomish, and Suquamish. And although they're not here, all of them are not recognized by the federal government, they are still here today. I offer gratitude to the elders and all other Coast Salish peoples, past and present and future, who have made it possible for us all to live and work in this community. And I want to invite each of us to seek authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, to continue to learn about the past and present colonial impacts, and to move beyond acknowledgement to action. I want to give a little historical information. Some of you are new to Mary's Place. Some of you are really good friends with Mary's Place. And you already know that Mary's Place started a little over 20 years ago. And we started as a day center for women experiencing homelessness in downtown Seattle. And our drop-in women's center is still the heartbeat of Mary's Place. And it is located at 9th and Stewart. Where we serve about 100 women a day. We are there providing basic necessities, showers, laundry, warm clothing, along with meals and resources for housing, employment, and wellness. And I think something important to note there is that we've seen a 24% increase in the number of senior women we've been serving in the last 2 years. We opened our first overnight shelter for women and children in 2012. And we have and continue to develop our emergency shelter program to really address the growing needs in our community. Not long after that first shelter opened, we knew that we needed to keep families together and address their housing needs together. And so we opened a shelter that included families with moms and dads, and then then invited single dads with children in, and then extended families and families with pets and families who had lost everything caring for their sick child at our Popsicle Place program. And what you should know, I think is important, is before COVID, we provided emergency shelter and meals together with resources for housing and employment and wellness for 800 moms, dads, and kids each night. But last spring, we had to close 4 of our smaller shelters to keep our guests safe and make sure we could socially distance inside those shelters. We now are down to 500 beds in 5 shelters across King County. So today, our amazing panel is going to share about how we're working to keep families moving quickly into permanent housing, or even better, to keep them in their homes, especially as we face the end of the eviction moratorium later this summer, and possible tsunami of families experiencing homelessness coming into the system. So let me briefly introduce our panel to you. I'm so excited I get to work beside these amazing individuals every day. And they're going to tell you a little bit more about their work as we get started. So quickly, Miriam, give everybody a wave. Miriam is our Mary's Place Housing Director. Natural Allah is our Housing Manager at Mary's Place. Hi, Natural. Ashley Kinney is our Housing Locator at Mary's Place. And Skelchum Kamendi is our Executive Director of Housing Connector, one of our valued partners in this work. Thank you, Skelchum, for joining us. And so I'm going to start with Miriam today. And Miriam, I'm going to ask you to share about the experience families go through on their journey into housing. Particularly, what are some of the barriers they're facing? What are some of the challenges that you know that they're facing, and how do you problem solve with families to help them find housing?
All right. Hey, thanks, Marty, and hello, everyone. I'm Miriam, Housing Director, and I manage the programs who work with families on their housing journey at multiple points after entering shelter. So we've got our housing specialists who work with families in shelter on their housing goals. That's Natural's team. And then we've got the Locators who work with specialists to help connect and offer options for housing. That's Ashley's team, and Skelchum will touch on that partnership and in a little bit. And then we have our stability team and Make a Home Furniture program that works with families as they leave shelter and enter their new home to identify community supports and obtain new and gently used furniture. So that's sort of a little snapshot there. But you know, when a family enters shelter, their most immediate concerns are things like getting a warm meal for their children and tucking them into bed that night. But they're also highly concerned about how to move from shelter into housing as quickly as possible. This is something we hear from day one. So when families come to Mary's Place, you know, they've been sleeping in their car, a tent, coming from sleeping by the bedside of a sick child at hospital or a treatment program, or they may be fleeing domestic violence. And you know, these families are often facing those significant barriers Marty mentioned. Some of the big ones are not having an ID or a social security card, birth certificates for themselves and their children, and other vital documents that are required to get employment and housing. Documents they get left behind when fleeing domestic violence, they get lost or destroyed, and working to obtain new ones can be really challenging, especially, since COVID has thrown things for a loop. All the state and federal offices were closed or had limited office hours, so that was a challenge. We've got some refugee and immigrant families who are seeking asylum, who are tied up in this complex immigration process and haven't been issued work permits or green cards yet. Some other challenges and barriers are that we've got families who are facing eviction debt on their records that need to be addressed before they can qualify for an apartment. But with all of these barriers, families are incredibly resilient and scrappy at just breaking them down and working towards them. We have one family who moved out in the fall, and she worked so hard to break down her housing barriers. She is a single mom and was hired as a Mary's Place custodial intern after coming to shelter. With the support of the employment team, she fought to get back her back unemployment that she was owed, went to a hearing and actually won her case. So she was able to, which is amazing. She was also able to get connected to behavioral supports for a special needs child and was on the road to housing. But she did have a past eviction debt caused by a relationship break with her child's father, and that just had ballooned with interest to over $6,000. But she and her housing specialist worked together to negotiate that debt down by half. So as soon as the debt was paid, mom was able to apply for a unit and she got approved. And then the family was able to get connected to beds, bedding, and blankets, and a kitchen set for their new home. So it kind of was this full circle, right? And despite these barriers families are facing when they come to Mary's Place, our teams work to connect them to as many internal supports as possible, like our youth and health services programs, and as well as external community providers. We like to connect families to, as many employment supports or education, behavioral health, whatever it is, we like to make sure they're connected. While, COVID has created more challenges for families that I'm sure you guys are aware of, but the juggling remote learning, finding ways to boost income in a shelter environment where you cannot leave your kids unattended, the Social Security office being closed. So a process that went from a few hours, now it takes sometimes weeks, sometimes months to obtain a new card. But even with all of that, we've been able to support 363 families to move from shelter to positive housing outcomes in 2020. And we've been able to maintain our goal that our average shelter stay was no more than 90 days. So it's been pretty incredible. Now we're at a place where we really just need to support families on maintaining these hard-won homes. Because as you know, we're still in a period of so much uncertainty and unknowns with how this pandemic will impact jobs and childcare and whatnot, right? So our stability team, one of the things that they've been hearing the most from families is that their number one worry is returning to homelessness. So we are actively working to develop prevention and rental assistance programming to answer their calls for help. I'll pass it back to Marty, and you'll get to hear more on the work we're doing and how we've been able to stand in the gap of services and help families with the rental assistance pilot a few months ago, as well as our other programs. So pass it back to you, Marty. Thanks.
Wow, thanks, Miriam. I am always astounded by the resilience of our families and their passion and their drive to knock down those barriers. So thank you for sharing that great overview. If you have questions for Miriam, please feel free to add those into the Q&A chat. You have a link or a button right down below, so we want to be able to answer those today. I'm super excited to introduce you to Natural. He is our Mary's Place housing manager who works with our families daily. So Natural, can you share about the work that you do and what it means for families?
Sure. My name is Natural Allah, and I'm the housing manager for Mary's Place, and my pronouns are he or him. We currently have about 7 housing specialists and 1 assistant housing manager who assists our guests in their day-to-day housing searches and with other facets of their lives. When guests enter shelter, they are connected to a housing specialist within about 48 hours of their stay. They go through a rigorous intake process, which includes various assessments so that we can understand each family's specific needs as it relates to housing. The beauty, I think, of Mary's Place is that it's a guest-driven program that uses the housing first model. And this model is a homeless assistance approach that prioritizes permanent housing to folks experiencing homelessness. Now, as a guest-driven program, we don't provide housing for our guests, but rather we partner with our guests by giving them the resources that we're privy to that assist the guests in finding their own positive housing solutions. Our housing specialists assist guests who have exorbitant rental debt due to evictions and utility arrears. We contact debt collectors, we negotiate debts down so that they then become affordable in scope and they cease to be a barrier to a family's housing. Although we don't have housing resources per se for families, we've created a network of landlords and property owners that work with us to assist our guests in creating successful housing solutions. But you'll hear more about that, these alliances as we go on. We assist families with obtaining documentation, such as birth certificates, social security cards, passports, and as Miriam said, it has been a little bit more difficult because of the pandemic. And we also do as much as we can in terms of finding out what information that the guests already have so that we can, I guess, nullify anything that's untrue and work with them on the things that are true and what they can hope to change and see in the future. Just an example, in March, we had a family that consisted of a single mom with 6 children. 2 of her children were undocumented. Originally, they were from Honduras and had negative situations there. They made their way to Mexico, and then from Mexico crossed the border here to the United States. The mom was extremely resilient and did everything that she could to take advantage of all the resources that were made available to her. This led her to full-time employment and a vehicle with the help of our employment services and with the help of our youth services. She was able to get her older children into the Boys and Girls Club and her younger children into subsidized childcare with the help of our housing specialists. The family was also housed into subsidized housing. And although the pandemic may have slowed down and altered many of our systems in the country, I think that the agency has learned to be creative when we're assisting our guests and helping to get our families into the places and positions that they want to be in. With this family, they were also given a great boost from the Make a Home program that assisted them with beds and other family furniture and things that they needed so that they weren't without, so to speak. So you can see that the agency is really an amalgamation of folks that are working together to do good, simply for the sake of doing good. And honestly, in recognizing that no child should sleep outside. So Marty, I'll pass that back to you.
Natural. I'm always inspired when you talk and share, and just thank you.
Thank you.
Team. I tell you, you are a lifeline, and you are so responsive. Your team is incredibly responsive and so nimble. The way that you've been able to flex and move and adjust during this pandemic has been life-saving and life-giving for our families. So thank you and the housing team for all that you do and for bringing in so many community partners to help and support us in this work too. So thank you. Now I have the pleasure of introducing you to Ashley. Ashley, her role at Mary's Place is our housing locator. So I'm going to ask Ashley to talk about what housing locators do and the work that you do with families to help them both find housing, but also the work that you are leading right now to help keep families in their home.
Thank you so much, Marty. And hi to everyone. It is my great daily pleasure to work closely with Miriam and Natural, and Skelchum and Marty and everyone else here. And as Marty said, I'm the housing location manager, and my team is responsible for creating and maintaining relationships with housing providers and with other partners like Housing Connector, with a goal of opening up more doors to housing for Mary's Place families. And then we work with Natural's team, with all of the housing specialists, to make sure that They are familiar with those partnerships and can pass along the opportunities to the Mary's Place families. So in the past, for the past few years, the housing locators have primarily worked with landlords at the early stages of the housing process. So before and during the family's application process up until move-in. But we've learned recently that maintaining relationships with landlords and housing providers looks a little different since the start of the pandemic. Families are struggling to pay their rent. These are the same families that are super scrappy and have worked so hard to get their families into that housing and to make it a home, and they're falling behind. And landlords that we call our partners are asking us how they can support their residents, because landlords don't want the families to struggle either. So we've been learning that the best way to support families and landlords is to connect them with rental assistance. Preventing homelessness is the best way to love our neighbors, and it turns out, I'll show you in a minute, it's also the most cost-effective approach. We were able to start doing a little bit of this work last year with our recent pilot program, and we call it the Mary's Place Alumni Rental Assistance Program. So perfect timing, Katrina, showing the first slide. Hang on a second to make this work for me. Okay, there we go. So before we fully kicked off the program in September and October of last year, Mary's Place staff reached out to every Mary's Place family that had moved into housing in 2019 and 2020. We spoke with families to find out how the pandemic had impacted their housing stability, and it had. Among those families we reached, 100 families told us that their housing was unstable and that they were behind on rent, some significantly. So on this slide, we've shown some key demographic info, and we know that families of color, single parent households, and those with disabilities or medical conditions already experience systemic injustices, including racism, disparities in education and healthcare, and now this is all in addition to the impacts of the pandemic. These families have been stretched to their limits. We listen to families talking to us about losing jobs, losing childcare, homeschooling in 2 small apartments, many without tables or desks or reliable technology. For families where a family member has a medical condition, venturing out into the world to meet basic needs became terrifying. Taking a child to a doctor's appointment is a whole new challenge because families have to take the bus. That feels unsafe to them. They may have to hire a babysitter to watch the other children that can't go into the doctor's appointment. Where do they find the money for that babysitter with no employment? And we even heard from multiple households that had to scrape together funds to pay for funeral expenses because they had a family member that died of COVID-19, and that left very little for their rent and other bills. With our pilot rental assistance program, we were able to start helping. We received $100,000 in private funds for this program. So what we did was in November and December and January, the stability team at Mary's Place connected again with each of those 100 families, and my team connected with their landlords. And what we were able to do is bring all families current on their rent through the end of 2020. So for 42 of those families, we found that the best way to assist them was to make direct payments toward their rent. They weren't eligible for other programs, and that was an average payment of about $2,300. The other 58 families were eligible for other community programs, and through our relationships in the community, we connected them with that assistance so that they were also brought current on their rent through the end of the year. Katrina, could you go away from slides for a minute? Actually, just close out of it, thanks. So these families were so grateful for the assistance. For a few days, they were caught up on rent and they had a chance to breathe. But unfortunately, many of these families are still struggling. As we too well know, many schools are not open, systemic injustices remain, jobs have not returned, and many of these jobs in the service industry may not return for the foreseeable future. So families see their bills piling up again, and the end of the eviction moratorium looms ahead for them. So the work that we did and the conversations we had through our pilot prevention program has demonstrated that much more eviction prevention and rental assistance funding is needed in our community. This is something I've long been passionate about, preventing homelessness whenever possible. We know there is a lifelong benefit when homelessness can be prevented, and funding eviction prevention is a proven way to do that. The exciting reality about funding prevention, it is is that it is both a trauma reduction approach and a cost-effective approach. So let's look at that next slide, please. Thank you. All right, here we've shown two scenarios. So the first scenario describes a family like families we commonly see. This family's been evicted from their home and they end up in Mary's Place shelter with only the belongings they can carry. Right now, the average Mary's Place family has 3.5 members and they stay in shelter for an average of 90 days. So the cost for Mary's Place to provide shelter to this family for that duration is $11,000. Then there are the unquantifiable costs of trauma and the major societal costs associated with this family entering homelessness. Displacement from their community, disruption to schooling and employment, and then countless mental and physical health impacts. And then we've shown that it's $5,000 or more for that family to move back into housing. This family, or families like this, work tirelessly to pool together resources from multiple organizations. One organization may help with that eviction debt. Mary's Place may help paying move-in costs. They may be able to connect with some short-term rental assistance, and then they have to find a way to get themselves new furniture and belongings. On the bottom half of the slide, we've shown a different scenario. This is a scenario where the family connects with a homelessness prevention organization before they lose their home and everything in it. So we've assumed here that this family's monthly rent is $1,700 and that they've fallen behind pretty significantly, 4 months of rent unpaid. So it would cost $6,800 to get them caught up with rent. Then we assume this family would be able to take a breath, pay some other bills, and work to regain their stability, which is hard in a pandemic. We assume that they'll need additional assistance for 4 months, but that's just half a month of rent each month. We know that in the past, many families didn't need this amount of assistance, and many families today only need 1 or 2 months of assistance, much less than the $10,000 shown in this example. But we showed this because we are seeing that the sums needed today during the pandemic for rental assistance are much higher. So we wanted to show an example like what we've seen with other families. But you can see that even with this 8 months of assistance, the benefits significantly outweigh the costs that would be incurred if this family fell into homelessness. So when looking at this and knowing that you're all here, I'm truly hopeful that by working together as a community, we can support our neighbors, we can spend our dollars more efficiently, and we can help hundreds or thousands of children and parents avoid that trauma of homelessness. All right, thank you all so much. Marty, back to you.
Wow, thank you, Ashley. You certainly know how to build a village, right? And thank you for reaching out and connecting us with some incredible partners, and for your team's passionate work to show the difference, to know that we can prevent families, that it is possible to help one family at a time, right? Until we can bring them all inside and keep them home. So thank you. Just a reminder, I see some questions coming in. Great questions, by the way, that we're going to get to. If you have any questions for Miriam, Natural, Ashley, please put them in there, and then you can add your questions for Skelchum after this as well. So I'm going to jump right in and introduce you to the amazing Skelchum. I just want to say thank you, Skelchum, for choosing to partner with us and for being on this panel today. The Housing Connector is such an important partner in this work, and we are so grateful that you chose to partner with Mary's Place. And I would just ask you today, can you talk about the importance of partnerships and share about your work and specifically how you partner with Mary's Place?
Absolutely, Marty. Thanks for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. Just a little bit about me. My name is Skelchum. I'm the founder and executive director of Housing Connector. It's a new startup nonprofit here in the area. And a little bit of background, I'm originally a refugee from Kosovo, which is in Eastern Europe. And when my family first moved to the States, we struggled with some of the challenges that the guests at Mary's Place face, which is how do you find housing when you don't have credit history, when you don't know anyone, when you don't have a job. And we were fortunate to have organizations, this was back in Dallas, that helped us, but it's something that influences the way I approach this work and the challenge. For a little bit of context on the Housing Connector and its genesis, prior to this, I was working at the Seattle Housing Authority. And one thing I kept seeing while I was there is that families and individuals that even if they had a subsidy or had the ability to pay for rent, still were struggling to find housing. And analyzing the problem, we realized that income or rent is not always the only barrier that keeps a family from accessing a home. I think Miriam shared a story about a mom who, because of past debt, struggled to access a home. And the truth is that one anecdote is something that we see over and over and over again in our community. And it's also something that we felt like we could solve. So the way we approach our work is that we believe that we need more affordable housing in our community, but we also know that we're not going to build our way out of this crisis. So we set out to say, how do we find a way to tap into existing units and make them available for individuals exiting homelessness? And our approach is to partner directly with property owners and managers throughout the community and offer them incentives and risk mitigation in exchange for them lowering or waiving their screening criteria. Specifically, what this looks like is a landlord will lower or eliminate their credit score, income to rent ratio, past eviction, and past debt screening. And in exchange, we'll provide them guaranteed rent, $5,000 in risk mitigation, and a single point of contact to address any issues that could threaten the stability of that household. And so that's the supply side. On the demand side, there are organizations that are working and doing so much to try to help families throughout our community. I think Mary's Place is an example, a leading example of the good work that's being done. But the truth is, the need is much higher than the units that we have. And so oftentimes, the process for finding units is really fragmented, and it's challenging for locators and case managers to find the specific home that will accept their guest or their client. And so what we decided with Housing Connector was, could we figure out a way to streamline and centralize that entire process so that now every individual in our community and every case manager has one place to go to find units for their clients. And again, what this will do is make it more cost effective and efficient for people to move in, but also what it will do is reduce the time that a family is experiencing homelessness. In our community, on average, it's about 86 days that a family that has a rapid rehousing subsidy takes to move in. There's nothing rapid about that process. And our goal is to work with our community partners to lower that time and also lower the trauma that's associated with each day that somebody is experiencing homelessness. Now, we've been operational for about 18 months. I think Mary's Place was actually one of our first partners that agreed to say, hey, we see the value, we want to partner and collaborate together. And in that time frame, we've worked together to house over 150 families. That's 150 families that through the work of Natural and Ashley and their teams, we've been able to figure out how do we get them into units if they have barriers such as past evictions or past debt, and then make sure that we work with that landlord to keep them stably housed. I think what Ashley just said is so spot on. And I'll just point this out, and it may not be the most popular thing to say, but look, sometimes we feel better about getting somebody out of homelessness, and the potential benefit that we feel or the value of keeping somebody housed, it's not as tangible. But the truth is, as Ashley mentioned, keeping people housed is so important. If we can decrease the number of people that are falling into homelessness while at the same time working on increasing the output of folks exiting, that is the way we will actually address this problem. And so the prevention piece is so critical. And what we do specifically is we work with Ashley and her team on a daily basis to respond to challenges that come up, whether it's non-payment of rent, whether it's a noise violation, whatever it may be, we respond in partnership so that we can address that issue upstream before it escalates and rolls out of hand and that family goes down the eviction path. Holistically, if I kind of go up a little bit, beyond Mary's Place, we work with about 70 nonprofits total. Mary's Place is by far our largest partner. But in that partnership, we have been able to house over 1,550 folks in the last 18 months. 70% of the people we've housed are individuals of color. And again, as mentioned, we know that oftentimes things like credit score, past debt, criminal history are actually a mechanism used for discrimination. And so our ability to pre-negotiate those criteria, in a sense, makes those levers of discrimination obsolete and allows families that previously couldn't get into housing to move in. So we're really proud of the work we're doing. We're excited to be able to scale this and continue to grow this work and these partnerships. But again, I think, as Ashley mentioned, no single person or no single organization is going to be able to end homelessness alone. We really need to work together, partner, identify what are our strengths, what are your strengths, and then leverage those strengths to do what is best for the families that we're here to serve. So I love the work that we do together, and I'm excited to see it grow. And again, look forward to hearing questions and discussing this further here in the next few minutes. So thank you, though, Marty and team, for having me.
It's an honor to have you here with us and to partner with you day in and day out in this work. So thank you, Skeltrum, for your passion and your drive to find more families permanent housing. So grateful for you. If you have questions for Skeltrum, put them in chat and the Q&A. We want to be able to answer those as well. I want to say thank you to this amazing panel for the really great overview of resources available to struggling families in our community and the challenges they face as they navigate this journey. I'm so grateful that they have compassionate, knowledgeable, and support in you and your teams as you help them address their barriers that they face and realize a dream home of their own. We want to get to your questions, so I'm going to jump right in. Katrina, do you want to read off our questions for us, and then one of the panelists can jump right in and answer that?
Great. So first off, I think Skeltrum, if you can help to answer this one, what can community members do to be more involved and influential in passing legislation that will positively impact these communities?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the short answer, and I'll also drop a resource here of something you can do immediately that's tangible, which is advocate for the expansion of the MFT program, the multifamily tax exempt program, which is up for renewal. And I'll drop a link in the chat so you can see that, because that alone will help preserve about 7,000 units, affordable units in our community. I think to answer the question directly though, look, I think a lot of state representatives, council members, legislators, they kind of hear from the same folks over and over again. It's just to be fully transparent. And I think at times maybe our voice, if it's constantly the one being heard, loses its steam or its impact. And so one thing you can do as a community member is for you to speak up, for you to reach out to your council member, for you to reach out to your state representative, and you advocate and you send them an email and say, look, what are we doing? What are you doing to address this issue, and how do we do more? And I think, again, I'm not taking away from the advocates and the work that we all try to do every day, but sometimes hearing it from somebody that's actually not in this work, but also has a passion and sees that this is a true issue that we need to address, sometimes resonates way more than hearing it from me, who frankly, they hear from me all the time. So that's one thing that you can do right away is you speak up, because I think your voice may carry much further than mine will in some of these scenarios. So, and then beyond that, like I said, I'll drop a link to something that you can do immediately that's tangible to advocate for the expansion of the multifamily tax exempt program.
Yeah, I think I can add there just a couple of things as community members, other ways to support. Raising your voice is critically important, but also funding prevention. Right now, you saw the data that Ashley shared with some private funding and what GAT can do for families that fall through the cracks, that don't win the lottery for the rental assistance, that don't live in large landlord projects, and that you can help other families with private funding. Also, there's opportunities, right? If you know housing opportunities, you know landlords that have available units, share those, share about Mary's Place, share about Housing Connector. We want to get those landlords connected. And then also Make a Home is one of our volunteer opportunities where you get to gather things. And in COVID, we're doing contactless drop-off so families can furnish their homes. So you collect beds and dishes and silverware and frames for pictures on the wall, those kind of great things that families can have to make their house feel like a home. And then you get to drop those off with our Make a Home coordinator, Irina. We can put a link in chat too, so that you can get contacted with our Make a Home coordinator. But that's a great project that you can do with your family, with your neighbors, with your book club, with your Zoom friends, whoever it is. We want you to be able to make sure that you can help furnish homes for families, because we know that when your house feels like a home, you're more likely to be able to stay there for a longer period of time. So next question, Katrina.
Great, yes. And I think maybe for Miriam, do you have plans to scale the prevention approach that was discussed, and how much do you think it can be scaled?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So yes, we're definitely working on getting prevention programming up to scale to surpass that 100 that Ashley talked about. We are hoping to apply for some federal funding, as well as utilize amazing support from the community to help families stay in their homes. So kind of looking at it from a two-pronged approach. Federal dollars do have restrictions, so we want to be able to be as flexible and as be able to respond as rapidly as we can. And I think there's some unknowns there, so it's a little hard for me to guess on exactly how large we're talking about and how much we can scale. But I think what we've seen is in a very short time, we were able to make this incredible impact on 100 families by utilizing this collaborative approach with, taking Ashley's team and the stability team. So I think there is an opportunity to scale it significantly to make a major impact for families who are currently, who are former Mary's Place guests, but also to support the wider community with those federal dollars at the very least. So yes, more to come on that as some of the unknowns start to become known. So I'll pass it back to Katrina for the next question.
Great, thank you. Speaking a little on the opposite end of that, when looking at shelter versus prevention costs, Miriam, were we assuming shelter stay costs for the Seattle area only, or are we able to partner with the county and state at large for housing options?
Yeah, so those costs are really looking at King County as a whole, but I would say we could probably guesstimate that those are regional costs because the rental landscape is fairly similar throughout both King, Snohomish, and Pierce to an extent. If I'm understanding the question correctly, I think in regards to leveraging state and local political housing, I'm not totally sure what that would look like. So sorry.
If they mean that Seattle's so expensive, do families move elsewhere to get lower cost of rent?
Gotcha. The answer is yes. We have families who end up moving throughout the region, as well as completely out of state at times, and relocating. That's not uncommon at all. And that's usually because the family identifies that their community of support is elsewhere. So we help support them with that. Is there any other piece of that question that or if there's any clarification? Apologies if I misunderstood it.
Skelchum, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add as far as how do we leverage other resources from the city, state, and federal, I think first and foremost, again, we need to tap into those resources. There's actually a pretty significant amount of funding that's flowing right now from the federal level with the recent bills that have been passed. And while it's a one-time thing that we can't expect to rely on in 2022 and beyond, there is an opportunity right now to tap into this funding in partnership with the city and counties specifically, and make sure that all of the Mary's Place alumni, actually, that I think the term that you mentioned, families, making sure that they're caught up right now. So we anticipate in King County alone, starting in mid-April, there will be over $180 million in rental relief coming to the community. Now, look, that may sound like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But the sad thing is that $180 million is literally maybe going to cover 20%, 30% at most of the amount that's owed. And that's, again, to tell you about the scale that we're dealing with. But what we can do as a community, and one thing we're working, Housing Connector is working with United Way in the county, is how do we make sure that these families that were previously experiencing homelessness tap into this funding as quickly as possible so that they can be caught up on rent, so that, again, that burden can be taken off of their plate, at least for the time. So those are some immediate things we can do. But then again, we need to coordinate better just as a community with the city and the county. And I hope the new regional homelessness authority that's being stood up will help, because we can't, like, for example, Mary's Place and other organizations can't do this work while also trying to navigate the challenges in the political space that is our community. Like, it's hard enough to get somebody housed, let alone trying to figure out how you deal with funding and everything else. So having a streamlined process and having everyone rowing in the same direction is going to be really, really critical for us to actually achieve some gains in the next few months.
Awesome. Katrina, can you share the next question for us?
Yes, and this maybe you can help to answer, Ashley. Is there any landlord side negotiation that you are able to help with? It strikes me that they have a lot more room to adjust back rent down than renters have to make up payments that are piling up.
Thank you. That is a really good question and a very good point. And I'm pleased to say that so far we've seen that landlords and property managers, for the most part, understand that this pandemic and the economic impacts of it are a community burden to bear. So they are willing to negotiate, and that takes a few different forms. So our most recent experience with our Alumni Fund, we set up a fixed term sheet that we passed to each landlord that a family was, where a family was housed. And we said, can you agree to this? Because these are the terms under which we'll make our payment. And one of the key ways we asked landlords to negotiate was that we had a cap. Our funder had set a $5,000 cap per payment. So for households that were behind more on rent, we said, could you accept this $5,000 and waive the remainder of the back rent? And they did, landlords did. So we saw some real cooperation and collaboration. Another way that landlords are really being flexible and collaborative is actually many of the Housing Connector partner properties have told Housing Connector, or Housing Connector may be requested, but either way, the landlords have said, we are not going to accept rental assistance right now because there's an eviction moratorium and we know these federal funds are coming. So it's okay for these families to continue to incur some balance because we believe that we'll possibly most likely be eligible for the federal funds, and we'd like to save any of the other funds for a later time when the federal funding has all been used up. So I think that's really helpful. And then when that agreement is reached, we can reassure families that, yeah, they don't want to see their rent piling up, but they are safe. They're safe in their home for now. And we've had that agreement reached with landlords. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes, and for the next question, I think Natural, if you're able to help provide an answer, what is the current amount of time in the rapid rehousing process, and what is the goal for what we want to reduce that time to?
Normally, well, rapid rehousing, I guess, has many facets in the sense that you have other different organizations such as Solid Ground or Vision House who are doing those types of programs. But I think normally for us, it's about 90 days or so. However, it's become a little bit more difficult simply because other agencies that offer rapid rehousing because of the pandemic are having staff shortages and things of that nature. And because there are different qualifications for rapid rehousing, whether it's documentation, whether it's some form of income, and things like that.
Great, thanks for that update. Katrina, do we have another question?
Yeah, I think we have one or two more here. How does the recent stimulus package impact Mary's Place? And are you able to help people get or access their stimulus checks?
Great question. Miriam, did you want to take that?
Sure. So the impact is going to be, it's always incredible for families to know that there is a little bit of cushion, a little bit of support. So we are just working to make sure families understand how to access their stimulus payment. And that's typically through the IRS website. There's a link you can go to check your payment status and determine if you're going to be receiving it either by direct deposit. Most of our families are going to be receiving it by check. So that's a big piece of it. And then, you know, for a lot of families, that money is already spent, but it's still, you know, this buffer. And so those are, that's valuable for families who are both currently in shelter with us and also families who are in housing. So we help with just that, you know, resource navigation, make sure that people understand the process.
Thank you, Miriam.
Sure.
Another question. Was Mary's Place involved in the conversation around the city's recent decision to refuse FEMA help?
Yeah, I'll start. We were not involved in that conversation, but I will turn it to Skelchum to see if you were involved in that conversation, because we haven't asked him that.
No, I was not. And I was, again, I was quite surprised to follow along in what was happening as well, but we were not, no one reached out to us either for input.
Any other questions?
One more here. I believe it was Skelchum who mentioned levels of discrimination in relation to landlord requirements or other barriers for renters. I would be interested in hearing more about changes in policy or regulations that could help eliminate such discrimination other than more money.
So that's a really good question. I'll give you an anecdote and then kind of an example. Here in Seattle, I think it's been now a couple of years, time has been blurry recently. We no longer allow in the city of Seattle for a landlord to utilize criminal history to determine whether somebody can be approved for an apartment or not. Whereas outside of the city limits, somebody can say, like, if you have a felony, if you have a misdemeanor, if you have a DUI, that could be grounds for denial. And that legislation, while it was met with quite a bit of backlash from landlords, what it does is it ensures that if somebody has a criminal history, that that's not used to penalize them and keep them from accessing a home. And I think it's a really good example of how legislation can be used to address some of the historical issues around systemic racism that are in other areas outside of housing. For example, the criminal justice system, and the fact that the injustice that is there translates into injustice into housing. And so I think cities can do more like that. I actually would love to see the state pass that for the entire statewide. I think it's going to be met with some pushback, but there's a possibility there. I think those are examples of things that we can do. Again, we could also do things like eliminate potentially credit score as a criteria. There's a lot of research showing that credit score is not a good indicator of whether somebody will pay their rent or not. And so I'd love to see something like that in the legislative space be done. So there's opportunities, and it's just do we have the will to actually push those through?
Thank you so much, Skelchum. And it looks like we have one more question, so please do feel free to add any more. But right now, this question is about vaccines. Are there programs available to ensure houseless families have faster access to COVID-19 vaccines? And how can the community help with this?
Great question. We've been in this process ourselves, and have had some trusted partners step up and offer space for Mary's Place staff and guests to get vaccinated. So we've been able to utilize that. We've worked internally from the beginning to compile our list and make sure that we knew that we were meeting the state criteria by age, by comorbidities, all of the other things that everybody else is following through with, frontline workers. So we are grateful that our time is here to be able to get our guests vaccinated. But yes, elevating voice is critically important in this process. We know that our guests are much more vulnerable. About 80% of our guests are from communities of color. We know that data has shown and told us that communities of color are 2 times or 3 times more likely to catch COVID and 2 times more likely to die from COVID. And when you are experiencing homelessness, those rates increase dramatically. And so we know that our guests that are experiencing homelessness, sorry, it's enough to choke you up, but it is literally, they are much, much more vulnerable. So we are working now to get our first guests vaccinated. So thank you for caring, continue to elevate your voice. If you know of any other resources, please share them, please reach out. We want to make sure we make those available to all of our guests as they come in. We make sure that we offer every guest on intake, meaning when they come into shelter, the opportunity to get vaccinated. And we are now working with our community to help our diversion guests. So those that are sleeping outside, those that are in tents, amplifying that message and creating opportunity, because we know that there is not equal access to this vaccine at this point in time.
I think we have answered all the questions that have so far come through.
You are all amazing. If you like the panelists, just give them a clap or raise your hands, give them a high shout out. Well, I thought they were incredible and amazing and just a wealth of information and support. Yep, there's lots of claps coming through for you, but thank you for being the light and the hope in this community, for choosing to come beside our guests every day. And I want to thank all of you that joined today. You are curious, you are passionate about helping families that are experiencing homelessness, and you want to learn more. And we're so grateful that you joined us today. So if you have additional questions or would like to somebody from our team to reach out to you, please don't hesitate to reach out, excuse me, to the links that we sent out or on our email, our website at info@marysplaceseattle.org. And there are lots of ways you can continue to partner with Mary's Place. You heard from Ashley earlier today, the cost of $35 to make sure no child sleeps outside. We can use those gifts really to prevent families from leaving their homes and to make sure that they have shelter when they do have to leave their homes. And excitingly enough, our 2 table captain chairs, our chairs of our luncheon, are on this call today. Yusri and Janelle, thank you for doing that. Our big luncheon is on May 5th. And we would love for you, excuse me, to sign up. And again, that's at our Mary's Place Seattle website. So you can sign up to be a table captain. You can sign up just to join us, but you're going to hear some more incredible stories about how resilient and courageous our families are. So please keep an eye out for more information about Lunch and Learn events. We do hope to do more of these and share more information about other aspects of our work that we are doing together with our community to address and prevent family homelessness. You'll receive a survey right after this call. I hope you'll take a few minutes to fill that out. That will give us more information, give us the great feedback that we need so that we can improve these and make these sessions more useful for you. So again, thank you for being you, for supporting our community, for being that village that we need so desperately. And thank you, Skelchum, in particular, as a partner in this work, for joining us today and for all that Housing Connector does in this community. Thank you all for being light and hope. And we are grateful for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. We want to stay connected. I hope this was a good start to your day. Please have a great afternoon. Thank you all.